Such a dramatic opening. Yeah. Well, good morning. It's good to see you all and everyone joining us online. It's great to have you as well. And so this morning we begin this new series, When the Going Gets Tough. And it's a series just looking at difficulty in life. And I'm kind of excited to do this series just because I feel like there's been this slow unfolding kind of clash that we all have to deal with, and kind of like plate tectonics. When you think about, the Earth's crust and it's slowly moving together, and there's this clash point, and the clash point is kind of a sociological one. It is the expectations that I see growing sociologically with this about just how we see life in the world, and then the reality of what's going on. And this is what it is. There's this. Like sociologically, more and more I see this thing where the expectation that we are hearing and that gets developed is that life shouldn't be difficult, right? And then that's clashing into the reality of what life is really like, and just feel this clash. And we're bombarded with all of these messages all of the time that life shouldn't be hard, that if there's something that gets really difficult or hard in life, that something's wrong, like something needs to change out of this. In fact, even prepping for this sermon, I tell you, I ran across a countless number of videos and articles and blogs and books that not only talked about how to avoid difficult things, like how to get out of that difficult thing, but how to make life easy. Like there was just kind of a message to it, intensifying this thing that like life, if you're doing life right, it should be easy almost. And I just think that messaging becomes a problem because we feel that. So like think of just your own life for a second. Ever feel like you get pulled into that thing where something's going on and it gets difficult and you just feel like, what's wrong with this? Because there's all this messaging that if something's getting difficult in your life, well, there's something wrong with that. You need to get either out of that or change something. And it just creates this avoidance issue when we face difficulty. And I think there's something better in how we can move forward or understand all of this. So that's what this series is about. Just how do we navigate difficulty? And this morning, what I want to focus on is perspective. Just what's that perspective we can take in navigating difficulty in our own lives? And in thinking about that, I was thinking about when I was early in my ministry. I worked at a very large church, and then straight from there, I ended up starting a church. And so I kind of got both ends of it, and found this group of people that were ready and wanted to start a church in Michigan. And so I actually moved to Michigan and started pastoring this church as a startup. They started this church, and at first it just seemed to go great. Like I was young and I was full of vision and energy and the things I wanted to do. And like there was no shortage of what could be. And we went after it, and it was like this wonderful thing, right? Until it wasn't, right? And I remember as a startup, we were able to secure some outside funding, which is really important for a startup church. And that was going well until it didn't. And all of a sudden, within 1 week, 50% of the funding we had, over 50%, just like disappeared. And as in my young 20s, and all of a sudden it's like our 50% of all the income for everything we were trying to do as a church disappeared. Like it was a crisis. It felt like a crisis because it was a crisis at that point, right? It's just like, how do we figure all of this out? And right on the heels of that, what I was not very aware of was that there was a relational rift that was kind of in the background with some of the folks that had come in to help start that church. And now we were probably like a year into this thing. And that rift actually blew up in a way that wanted to just rip that church apart. And And that, in many ways, was actually more serious to the health of what was going on in that church than the financial piece. And you put those two things together, and I was just in a spot where I was just like, I am so far in over my head, and this is the pain of this. I felt like there wasn't one decision I could make that was the right decision. And the intensity of it just grew and grew and grew. And I can honestly say, like at that point in my life, I had never felt the weight of something so difficult as I did at that point. I was losing weight over this thing. And so through that, I was talking with a mentor of mine who was actually the senior pastor of this church before me, Roger Barrier. And I remember very distinctly at one point when it just kind of reached this critical point, I had called him up and I was walking him through everything, and it was pretty late at night there, and we had talked for a while. And Roger asked me this question. He goes, Glenn, what do you want? He asked that. And I blurted out, I like my voice went up an octave. Like he asked that question, I was just like, oh, I want to get out of here. That's like, it was just like, it was this visceral, like I want to be gone. I want to avoid, this hurts, right? This was not my dream. This is like, I had, all the wonderful things, and I'm a brand new pastor, I wanted out of there. I was just like, I want to go. Do you have a job offer in mind, Roger? I'll move to and I'll never forget what he told me. Because in a very calm voice, he said, Glenn, you can't do that. And that really shocked me. Like when he asked me that question and the honesty at which I answered it, I thought he was going to go, well, now we know the honest answer, and this is what you need. It's just like, it's like that, because it came from the heart. And I'll never forget, he said, Glenn, you can't do that. Don't leave. This is the wrong time to step out and avoid. And I'm so glad he gave me that advice. But I can tell you, in the moment, it was just like everything in me was like, but the right answer should be to avoid any more of this, to get out of this. But there was some really deep wisdom in what he offered in that. And that's the thing that I want us to get at this morning, because there was something that he offered in that I think will help all of us as we navigate things that are difficult in our own lives in all of this. And I want you to think about, what is it that you face? And maybe there's something you face right now that is profoundly difficult, or maybe you've just come through something, or if not, there's something coming, isn't there, in all of this? And so what I want to do is I want to walk through a passage in the book of James. And if you want, I'll set up what happens there, but if you want, you can flip to James chapter 1. We're going to start just at the very beginning of James. It's a little bitty letter closer to the end of the New Testament than the beginning of the New Testament. But here's what's going on. James is writing this letter to Christians that primarily have had to flee persecution. So the church, if you picture the church in the very earliest of days, primarily started in Jerusalem, and it spread out from there. But there was this pretty intense persecution that started soon after the church gets formed. And as that persecution takes place, it forces all of these new Christians to actually move further away, and the persecution chases them a little bit. So you now have all of these Christians that are scattered across the Mediterranean area, especially as you get closer to Palestine. And so James is writing this letter to this scattering of all of these Christians out there. And so here's how he opens up this letter. He says this. He says this in verse 1, and it's this little bitty short greeting. It says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. Greetings. And that's it. That's his greeting. And most of these letters that you see in the New Testament have a paragraph or two, and maybe not super lengthy, but most of them are much longer than this. This is kind of a short little greeting. And then he just moves straight into what he wants to talk about in this. And you've got to picture this, right? This letter probably got copied multiple times and gets spread out to all of these Christians and brand new little churches all over the place. And these are mostly Christians that have understood what it is to be persecuted. They are refugees, many of them. They're living in places that they never thought that they would be living. They're trying to eke out an existence. Many of them are in cultures that they may not have fully understood, that would be different than their culture, maybe separated from their family. And here they are. And here's what James says. Look at verse 2. He dives right in it. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." Just hello, greetings, boom. Consider it not just joy, right, when you face trials of many kinds, but pure joy. Think about that. Consider it pure joy. Think of some family, and they've gotten their copy of James's letter, and maybe another family had it and read it and passed it off to them. And it's just like, "Hey, honey, I got the copy of James's letter." And they would have known of James. Let's read it, And he starts off, "Consider it pure joy when you consider those trials." And I can just see people going, you don't need to finish the rest of that letter. Just throw that away. Because that just, if James was here right now, like what we're going through, like in this moment, and it's like, man, I mean, think about what is it that you face right now? That difficulty, maybe it's with work. Maybe it's something going on in your family. Maybe there's someone struggling in your family right now. Maybe it's a health concern. What is it? And think about those words. Consider that thing that is painful or difficult that you would just be like, "Get me out of here." Like, how do I avoid this? Pure joy? I mean, oh man. Now, there are two things that I want you to notice about this as I walk through this. And here's the first thing I want you to notice. He doesn't say, if you face trials, if you face some difficulties, I want you to consider it pure joy. He says, whenever you face. He assumes we will have problems and difficulties in this world. That's his assumption, friends. Just a quick survey, okay? And as I do this survey, I'm gonna ask you to raise your hands, and when you raise your hand, keep your hand up until I get through the whole list here, okay? But if you've had to navigate a really difficult struggle in the last 10 years at work, raise your hand. Something with career or work, raise your hand, keep it up there. If you've had to navigate something in the last 10 years really difficult that was an illness, add your hand to that. If it was something with family, whatever it could be, relational in family or just struggles of any kind of family, raise your hand. If it was with friends, raise your hand. If it was with finances, raise your hand. If it was with school, raise your hand, okay? Now, here's one, keep your hands up. Now, just look around the room for just a second or two. Do you see what you see? All right, now you can put your hands down. Did you notice, other than a few people who didn't know how to tell the truth, everyone had their hands up, right? Yeah. Difficulties in life are absolutely normal. I think that gets missed in our world sometimes because there's this bombarding of messages that somehow life done right will be easy or difficult free, or that when you run into a difficulty, it can be sidestepped easily. Which is, and there's no crime in that. No one likes the pain of a difficulty. But that's different than not realizing that it's normal, that we're all going to face difficulties in this life. Okay. Second thing that I want you to catch from what James is saying here, and it has to do with this perspective about difficulties. And his perspective is difficulties actually hold an opportunity in them. And that's not something that gets shouted much in our world today. Look back at verses 2 and 3 here. It says this: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." And this idea of perseverance is this, think of it as like staying in it, right? Not sidestepping. There's something about having to endure through, staying in, and working through it that does something that is actually your opportunity. There's actually something in that that is good. And this is not a popular perspective, is it? And I want to talk to you about two perspectives here as we think about what James is saying. And here's the first perspective that I want you to think about. It's this, and I'm going to call this the to-me perspective of difficulties. There is a to-me perspective of difficulties. And what I mean by this is this has happened to me. I look at a difficulty and my perspective is like, oh my gosh, this is what's happened to me. In other words, I am at the mercy, or I'm at the effect of that thing that has happened to me. And it just becomes this perspective. And when you think about those difficulties that when I asked you to think about that earlier, it's right real quickly we can think of, yeah, those things have happened to me, whether they're in family or health or whatever it is. I am at the effect of some other employees where I work. They did some things that had this negative effect on me. Or I'm at the effect of the stock market and it goes up and down. I'm at the mercy of my competitors and the things that they do, or the weather. Or I'm at the effect of what my spouse does, or my children, or my bank account. But it's all happening to me, right? That's that perspective in there. And again, what I'm not saying is that I'm not trying to say, pretend like nothing happens to you. This is about perspective. How do I primarily view these difficulties? Because that to me perspective often gets us stuck. And here's how it gets us stuck in one of two or both ways here. It gets us stuck with blame. Right? If I feel like I'm at the effect of that coworker, the place I go is I want to blame my coworker, I want to blame my spouse, I want to blame my boss. Like they're the reason that I'm facing this difficulty. And we get stuck focusing on that. The other one is we get stuck in these why questions. And there's lots of times when a why question is a very good question. It gets it to the root of something. But oftentimes when we think about that why question when it comes to difficulties, it doesn't necessarily help, right? Because the first why question we all ask is, why me? Why did this happen to me? Why did the stock market, take that dive right when I made that massive investment, right? Or why did God allow this to happen to my health? Why? And we ask all of these why questions that really come out of this perspective of this is happening to me, but we get stuck there, right? And it invites a victim mentality. That to me, it wants to pull us towards that. Now, let me just throw a caveat out here on this, because what I'm not saying and what you won't see with James in this is not to say that we're not going to be victims of or be acted upon in some way in this world. James writes this letter and he says, consider it pure joy. He fully understands that he's writing this letter to people that have been the victims of religious persecution. He gets that. But notice, he is thoroughly pushing him into a different perspective. He's not saying pretend like those things didn't happen. But when he says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, he is asking you to take a perspective, despite what has happened to you, to actually look at those difficulties in a different way. And we can do the same thing with this. And this gets to this other perspective that I want to put in front of you. And it's this. I'm going to call this the by me perspective of difficulties. And what I mean of by me is what's going to happen by me. What am I going to do given the circumstances I'm in, right? And what this one always does is it pulls us back around to our perspective to actually focus and think about, how do I get to respond to this? How do I get to proact towards this? What do I actually have power over, right? Because I don't have power over the stock market. I don't have power over my spouse. I don't have power over my family. There's a lot of things I don't have power over, right? But what happens if I hold a perspective that actually starts to pull me toward what I can influence, what I do have power over in all of this? A by me perspective invites me to see everything as unfolding as your opportunity or your chance to grow as well. That's the other thing that it does. In fact, in some ways, this is what James is driving toward. That when we take a by me perspective, it opens us up to see these opportunities as a chance to actually grow in some way. Look at what he says in verse 4. He says this, he says, let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. In other words, as you persevere, as you hang in and you don't try to step out or avoid, there are two things that result from staying in and actually navigating through difficulties instead of avoiding them. And he says it is, in most of your translations, it'll be either like maturity and perfect, and then, or maturity and like complete. And these words get translated in a few different ways, but I want to point something out about each of these words because there's something kind of cool going on with these. So that first word that you probably have is like mature. The root of that word is a little Greek word called teleos, and it just means end, like the end of something. And so the word he uses is a form of that, and it was telos. And the word he uses is teleos, which it takes this idea of end, but it's like teleos means that you're becoming that end thing, and the idea is of what you were meant to be. So teleos is like maturing to become the thing you were meant to be. So if you had an acorn, and an acorn teleoses, then it means that acorn has become an oak tree. If you have a child and it teleoses, it means it's become an adult. And so catch what he's saying here in this moment. For you to become the thing that God created you to be, intended you to be, you don't get there without some lessons that come from difficulties. If you're that acorn trying to become the oak tree, you don't get there if you've avoided every difficult thing in your life. There are just lessons that we learn through difficulty that if we avoid them, we don't become that thing. And the other word that he uses here is kind of a cool word as well. It's the root word of it is kleros, and it just means a portion or a part of something, okay? And it has this prefix, olos, so it's olos kleros, and olos means entire or like all. So literally what it's saying, like holos kleros, means all the parts. And when you think about like that prefix, holos, it's where we get our English word holistic. So wholeness or holistic. So think of it in this way. Who you are is made up of all of these different things and aspects, all the beautiful things that make you, you. And what he's saying is, some of those things you don't get unless it's forged in the fire of something difficult. There's a part of you that is ready to be part of you. But if you keep ditching out of things that are difficult, it never gets forged. That part of you will be missing in all of this. And so when you think about that, what he's saying is, what he's not saying is, difficulties aren't painful. What he's saying is, there's a joy to it because all that you want to be as something mature and something that is whole, that difficulty is actually your friend in helping you to get there. I think about Roger, telling me, Glenn, don't leave. And it's just like, I can't think of one good reason to stay. And you're just like, but here's part of why his advice was so good. As a young pastor, to say I was energetic was an understatement. To say that I was fixated with a sense of mission and passion, I've always been mission-minded. My heart, I bet from the day I was born, I was like on a mission for all the other babies in the nursery or something at the hospital. That's part of who I have always been, like mission. What's the result? Where are we going? But a part of me that was missing as a young 20-something-year-old pastor was to have a kind of deep compassion for the people I was trying to pull into that mission. But walking through what I walked through as that young pastor, staying in there and just experiencing the pain and the difficulty and having to pastor through that with all those other people, it's like there was a part of me that I became a far more compassionate person just from going through the pain in that. And it made me more complete in that. And no, I would have never chosen to go through that. Just like none of you would choose to say, hey, I think I'm gonna go through something that'd be awful and painful and feel like it'll last longer than what I can endure. Like, we'd never do that. But when you find yourself in that, know from a by me perspective, there's a kind of learning that just, there's no substitute for what can be forged in a moment of difficulty. And it can make you more mature and whole in some beautiful ways. And I know as I explain this, it's easy to feel in theory, but I know when we're actually going through it, there's a part of it that just gets really, really tough, doesn't it? And so let me just offer a couple of things here. I want to offer just a couple of things here. If you're in the middle of it, and if you're not, I know that you will be at some point, right? And so here, can I just offer a couple of things to help with a perspective that will help you to grow and navigate some of this stuff. So here's the first one. And I will say this as a compassionate challenge. How about that? Take on that by me perspective. Even in the moment that you find yourself just pulled towards that to me thing, where it's just like, but Glenn, you don't understand how these people did these things. Man, I get that, I do. Because I've been on the receiving end of it, just like every one of us in this room have been at the effect of someone or something that we didn't like. But here's what I want to compassionately challenge you with. To lift your eyes up and ask a different kind of question in this. And it gets back to that by me. By me, what can happen by me? And Roger actually helped me with this that night on the phone. After the dumbfoundedness was overcome in my brain when he said stay, and I talked through it with him, and then I'll never forget, he said this as well. He said, Glenn, that church needs its pastor. I hadn't thought of that in that way. I was in so much pain and reeling and confused and felt like I'm in over my head. I don't know how to lead this thing. But notice everything I just said, it was me. I can't do this. This is hard. I don't know how to do this. It's like, and Roger didn't ask me if I knew how to do it. He's just like, you got to go do it. It's just like, but when he said those words, the church needs you. For all the reasons you've just explained, this church needs its pastor more than it ever has in its short little life. And I heard those words and I was just like, wow, the change of perspective. Everything that had happened to me hadn't changed. But in that instant, Roger changed my perspective. And it was just like, okay, so now instead of asking why this has happened to me, why me? Now it became a what question. And you can ask this question. Let go of the why question here. And it's like, so what can I do? What can I do? Like there's all the things I can't do, but what can I do in this moment? Think about that in your situation. What can you do that would make a positive difference? What can you do that would be a gift in the moment? Maybe what you bring is just being a compassionate person in that moment. Maybe what you do in the moment that you're in and you're like, it's chaos and it's like, Glenn, what? And maybe it's just being the person who can take a deep breath and be the calm person in the room. You may not even you don't even have to be the wise person that has the perfect answer. Just being the calm person in that moment may be the thing that you have to offer that is the gift. What is that thing? The second thing that comes out of this is not just what you have to give in that, but here's the second challenge in this, and it's learn from the difficult times. There's something for you to learn. There's something for you to grow in all of that. And look at what James says. Look back at verse 5 here. He says this. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Yeah, I mean, he literally just says, I know you're going through a lot. Ask God for some wisdom as you're seeking to navigate that difficulty in a way that matures you and makes you more whole. Ask God for what you need to learn. And here's the struggle that we have with this. Because in those moments that we seek to learn when things are difficult, sometimes it means that we have to see something in ourselves that we just don't want to see. Like, it's so much easier to think about what other people have done that is the problem and the wrong thing that they've done to you. But we also live in this world, again, I'll say this, there's so much messaging in our world that steers us away from it's being okay to own mistakes and problems that we make. And because and I say this knowing that there's probably a great deal of you right now that grew up in a home or you grew up in a church where it was never okay to make a mistake. It was never okay to not get the thing done the right way perfectly the first time, that somehow you were expected to magically know how to do school and life and everything the right way the first time. And so the idea of failure at any level or admitting that you were wrong is just a killer in this. But this is where James's words are such a gift. Look at what he says. When he says, when you pray for wisdom, and he says something about God here. He says, you should ask God, who gives generously to all, what? Without finding fault. God's point in helping you and I grow is not so that he catches you in what you did wrong. That's not his point. You know what his heart is? That you become more teleos, right? Mature and more whole. That's what he wants. And to discover a moment where you go, oh, I didn't do that perfectly. I made a few bad decisions in that. I missed a few things. I was blind in that. That's just your opportunity to learn. And let it be okay, because God himself he's not after trying to find every fault with you. He just wants you to grow. And so sometimes being able to pull back and say, okay, God, as I'm going through this painful thing, what are the lessons for me? What did I miss? What did I read wrongly? Where did my own desires blind me to something? Where was I naive? Where was I think back on that situation, and as much as I didn't want to admit it at the time, the truth was, as time went on, I was able to look back and go, you know what? I contributed to it. There were moments, and it's not because I was trying to, it's just I hadn't learned some of those lessons yet. But I wanted to learn those lessons so that I could lead and navigate life in a wiser, more mature way later. And so when you go through those difficult moments, one of the good things out of them simply is it is an opportunity for you to learn. And you're allowed to do that without beating yourself up, without believing that God is just hammering you with great judgment. It's just to say, God, help me see what I need to see in all of this. Because if you do that, you will grow. And you will like what it does for you. I think back on that, and again, I would have never chosen to go through that situation. It was gut-wrenching. But I am so glad I listened to my mentor and pastor of so many years. Because when he said, Glenn, don't go. You need to be a pastor to that church. I grew out of that. Like I said earlier, I grew in compassion. I've got to tell you, the value of integrity took on a far greater weight in my own heart. And it was because of some of the things that went on through that. And I looked at the pain and things, it did. I came out of that and in a way that made me hold integrity differently. I grew in compassion. I realized I was stronger than I knew and I'm sure some of you have learned that lesson. You go through something and you come out on the other side and you're like, wow, I didn't think I'd be able to survive that. And yet here I am, right? And the other thing I for sure got out of that was a deeper sense of whatever hole I am in, trusting God is actually a trustworthy place to put your hope and your trust. Because when I just thought there was no making it through that, I've experienced firsthand just God's trustworthiness. And all of those things have just, man, I can't imagine trying to live life now as a husband, as a pastor, as a friend, and not having gained what I gained through that. And the same will be true for you, because there is actually something of pure joy to be gained out of these difficult moments that we navigate, especially if we take a perspective to learn and grow and offer something out of those. Before I close this in prayer here, let me just say, if you're a guest here this morning, it is great to have you, and I'm going to be around over by those high top tables and would love to welcome you this morning. And if any of you need someone to pray for you or with you, we have some wonderful grace-filled people in our prayer place over here who would love to pray with you. Why don't you stand, and then let me close this in prayer. Let me pray. Father, we just thank you again for what you teach us and how you grow us through those difficult times. And I pray that you help us to take on a perspective as we face them that it isn't given a lot of voice in our world these days, but help us to see what you're doing in and through us. And we pray this all in your Son's name. Amen. Have a great morning.